So let's get started. Welcome everybody. We do this every 2 weeks. It's an informal Q&A where we encourage folks to ask us questions around a particular topic, right? And we'll kind of nominate and ask for topics. This is the composition of the team. Derek and Emily, who flank me in the bottom row, are not here this week. They're each out, but we've got a quorum and the group we need. And our topic today is drilling down further on the recent announcements about SharePoint workflows and some new guidance. So the 3 sub-bullets at the bottom. Mistakes from the last presentation that we want to set out to correct. New things we've learned since the last presentation, and then additional Q&A that we've received since.
And
as well
John,
as a guest.
John was
yeah. I got John in here. I got John in here as a guest.
All right,
I didn't do a whole slide for John, but I'm excited. We're super excited. I think our first guest, right? Our first guest speaker.
He's also the source of the errata. He's the one who pointed out my mistake.
The source of the errata. Boy, if there's anything that could be on my tombstone.
Oh, what?
All right, let's. This is the context, right, for our discussion. I think everybody's aware of this. I won't spend a lot of time on it, the scope of what we're talking about and why. Let's talk about what we got wrong, first of all, and then we'll talk about kind of what we learned, so we regret the errors. Mark, do you want to take the HTTP actions?
Yeah, I think this is almost more of a nuance than a mistake. Mm-hmm. Claim that. So there's more. There isn't just one HTTP request connector. There are 2. There may be some more in other connector. What's the word, John? The families of actions and triggers. So there's the SharePoint connector. There's the Exchange connector. There may be other HTTP requests in other connections, but the 2 that we talked about were within the SharePoint context. That's a free connector, so you can make HTTP requests to SharePoint REST endpoints for free. Everything for free is really for pay, but it's not an additional cost. And then there's an HTTP action that allows you to make a request to any endpoint. So, for instance, you could hit CNN's RSS feed if you really wanted to. That's a premium connector. So as you're converting your SharePoint 2010 workflows to Power Automate flows, it's likely that any HTTP request that you're doing is to SharePoint, because that's sort of the scope of those workflows, so you won't incur any additional costs. John, maybe you can help us, because I'm not quite sure we understand the child flow idea. So we can have a centralized sort of parent flow that calls, or I'm sorry, we can have a central workflow that a lot of other flows can call. Could you explain a little bit about how that works?
Yeah, so this is several years ago before the licensing change. There is a blog post on the flow blog that basically says you can make a flow that uses the request trigger, which turns the flow into almost like a web service, and then use HTTP to call that flow. After the change of the licensing, where HTTP and also the request trigger becomes premium, these are not easily available for us using the Office 365 license. There is a different way to do child flows, and that's only available if you put your flows inside a solution. So the Power Platform has solution packaging useful for deployment, very similar to SharePoint's traditional solution packages, basically a zip file of various assets. This is really built on top of the Dynamics 365 solution system. So within a solution flow, you can use a special action called a child flow. So this is an action that's only available when you're inside a solution. And using that, how do I say it? Yeah, using that action, you can call another flow that uses the flow button trigger. And that is all within the standard license. Now, solutions in your default environment is part of the standard license. So that using solutions is not necessarily premium. So that's, yeah.
So do we have an errata on our errata?
Yeah,
The HTTP actions are
it's complicated. Really,
Yeah.
it would have been nice if HTTP remains on the standard license, but the entire platform relies on wanting people to buy premium, right? And premium is all these third-party connectors like Salesforce and all these other connectors. But as long as there is HTTP, it became a backdoor to everything, right? Like, why would I buy Salesforce connector when I could just grab a dev key and then call the Salesforce API? So it wasn't something that could stay. So when they move HTTP to premium, they had to work around a whole bunch of other scenarios, like child flow is really useful. We have no way to do child flows. So it took them several months to bake this thing back out.
So what's the scope of a solution?
A scope of a solution is deployed within an environment. So environment in the Power Platform is really it's kind of like a site collection. Like imagine it being a bundle of database size, quota, and yeah. So kind of if we think of parallels between the Power Platform and SharePoint, then an environment within the Power Platform is like a site collection. So a scope, a solution is deployed within an environment, and it unpacks Power Apps flow, CDS list into that environment. You can retract the solution, you can upgrade the solution, and you can deploy a new copy into a different environment. So you can use environments to do dev and test as well. What solution is not good for is you can only deploy one copy. So if you wanted a flow to be attached to 20 SharePoint sites, solution is not good at that because you can only attach a flow to one site.
Okay.
Yeah.
So even though the way we had hoped that child flows would help people by being able to contain a little bit of code and then call it from a bunch of different other flows, the solutions thing doesn't really solve that either because it's sort of contained in that environment. So you can't call it from other solutions. Yeah.
Yeah, and then,
Bo had a question on that too. Go ahead, John.
Solutions has this idea of a managed solution where you're using it mainly as a deployment mechanism. But there is also the concept of an unmanaged solution. Basically, you use a solution and you create flows, and it could be many, many flows, but you do them all within a solution. That's so in that model, you could still create many SharePoint flows that then call one common child flow, and all your 20 copies plus one are all inside one unmanaged solution. So that still works. It's a bit weird, but yeah, it kind of works.
Okay. Bo also had a question that he put in the chat. How do you make a solution in a default environment? Every time I've clicked to create a solution, it says you need a database, which makes you create a new environment. Can you clarify?
Oh, in the Power Platform, so if you go to admin.powerplatform.microsoft.com, and then on the left-hand side, there is an Environments tab. And if you don't have a CDS database, then within that environment, there is a button or something to click it, and it will create a CDS database. You do need a CDS database to use solutions, but there should be one on your default environment. Yeah. If you don't have a CDS database in your environment, you can't use approvals, so it will be very weird. Yeah. Try creating approval. You'll probably kick something down the back end to get the CDS provision.
Mark, you're on mute if you're talking because you look like you're talking.
Yeah. So does that mean, as I understood it, if you create a CDS, a database, and it's DataFlex Pro database, that starts to be a needing a new license situation? Or are you saying that the database in a default environment is covered by the license?
Some usage of the CDS in the default environment is not counted. Things like using solutions, things like using approvals, which is really a CDS list. Now, if you actually want to read that CDS entity, you then need a premium license. So for example, if you wanted to build a system of, hey, we create all these flow approvals, but we don't really know what's going on with these states. So we would like to read that list. Well, you need one CDS premium license that lets you read that list in CDS. You can run that on a schedule and copy that out to SharePoint or something. Or use it to manage that list. So you can kind of see what are approvals outstanding, what are approval requests, and who are they sitting with. Yeah. I wouldn't recommend updating that list because it doesn't re-trigger the approval webhooks to complete. So you get the CDS completed, but then some of the flows, the webhook doesn't come back. So I wouldn't necessarily, I wouldn't update it. But from the CDS, you can get the approval ID and then also the approval request ID, and you can actually reconstruct the approval link from that. So you can show it in the SharePoint list. These are outstanding approvals. They're sitting with Mark and Todd. And if you click them, they will take you right into the flow approval dialog, so you could complete them. Sometimes a manager is sent 3 approvals, and they think in their head that they've clicked all 3, but they haven't. So there is 1 approval outstanding. So something like that may help, where you do a report and send them, hey, you forgot this one. You need to approve this one. It's a separate thing.
I think we're getting into Power Automate 300 level here, at least. Given that most, and I'll stick with this until the day I die, most SharePoint 2010 workflows that I see act on a trigger and they send an email. So all of this stuff is sort of the next generation. If you start really using Power Automate seriously, I think then you're going to start getting into some of these more complex topics.
Yeah.
The other thing I said last time was that there were 5,000 calls per account per month, and that was the old way, right? And John, you corrected me on that.
Yeah. So this one is gone much harder. It used to be 5,000 calls per standard account, all put together in a tenant, which is wonderful for Office 365. We have so many people, ginormous buckets, of course. That's all gone away in the licensing change. Today, these things are limited by what they call API call limits, and they are not pooled. On the standard license, there is, I don't know what the number is. Yeah, on the standard license, and then so there is a pool per day, and then there is a pool per hour. If you are like putting SharePoint connection in a loop and just looping it quite a lot and call, you will hit that limit. The limit is per user. So it's possible for John with my flows going crazy, they kill their limit, and then in the afternoon my flows start to error. So that is possible. So this is a different throttle than, say, the SharePoint API throttle. This is something that's measured and tracked. Now, it's kind of a soft limit. You're not really going to get stopped right away. You really, most likely, you have some sort of flow that's really running way too much, like several thousand times, maybe tens of thousands times per day. Then you will see this. So it's a soft limit. Part of it is they don't really have a report that tells you this, so they are not being too harsh yet because they have no way to tell you.
When you say it's the number of API calls per day, by user. There's the user who initiates the flow, and then there are the connections under which it runs. Which user?
It's the user that the connection is running with. So this probably goes into the whole instant flow and what's the other one? Automated flow. So if your flow is triggered by any kind of webhook, SharePoint triggers, then they always run as the maker. So in fact, you could buy the maker one premium license. So if you have really heavy flow, that sounds terrible, sorry. If you have really busy flows that process a lot of approvals or something, it's worthwhile to buy one premium license for that user. Or if you have a service account that's using multiple different lists and you know that the usage is much higher on this account, it's worth it to just buy one premium. Because with the premium, there's a higher tier of API calls as well. So in my mind, there is a pretty clear path, like, common, like busy business service user accounts that manage and runs a lot of flows, that buy premium on that, and also you get to access the premium connections, which is quite good as well. So I do find if you have to buy premium for 500 people in the company, that gets very expensive. But in general, buying it for a few service accounts, I think that's very acceptable. Yeah.
There's been a lot of discussion in the community around whether that sort of service account concept, where you run most of your sort of enterprise flows as a user who may or may not actually exist, whether that's a legitimate use of a and make that user licensed, whether that's a legitimate use of the licensing model, and I've heard totally contrasting things, both from people in the community and from people at Microsoft. So I'm not sure what the right answer is.
I could tell you what Charles Lamanna says. He's the head of the Power Platform. He says that's fine. So
is that in writing somewhere that we can reference?
Yeah, it's in a tweet.
That's the problem.
That's as legitimate as we're going to get.
There's everything from this document that's about this thick that no one can understand to the tweet that says that it's okay.
But if you think about it, how Flow works when it connects to SharePoint is pretty much the same as logic apps. If Flow ever says, no, this is not valid, then take the Flow and run in logic app. It still runs with one connection. So there is no... Now, there is one kind of exception I do mention. CDS has a special licensing rule around multiplexing. So using service accounts to read and write to CDS is not, there is a special reason. So CDS doesn't allow that. But if you want to use a premium account to write to SQL database, or write to Azure, or write call an Azure function, those are all fine. There is no multiplexing rule on Azure database or SQL database or
That's
Cosmos
awesome, John.
Yeah.
John, thank you for kind of fleshing out some of this. If we can document and send a link to that tweet, I'll ask Todd and the folks from Some Praxis on the call to kind of make sure we have that in our pocket and in writing for folks who are on the call. And also, if you've blogged it, John, or you can point us to what Microsoft publishes regarding the number of calls per plan or for different plans, across the premium plans and the standard, that would probably be a useful thing for us to follow up with. So we can follow up with you after the fact to get that down. I want to be cognizant of time. We got about 10 minutes left. But John, thank you for joining us. Thanks for contributing. Thanks for staying up at night with us. We certainly appreciate it. You're half a world away, but we definitely appreciate the help. I'm going to touch next on, or ask us to kind of dive into a couple new things that we've learned since the last call. And Todd, I think you'll take us there if you don't mind.
Yeah. So a couple of things that I wanted to add, and I'll be quick because we've got a lot of questions and not a lot of time. One of the things that I blogged about when this first came out was how to find these workflows that are going to get shut off unceremoniously on November 1st. And Microsoft had a free tool that already did that and a whole bunch of other things called the Modernization Scanner. Since I blogged about that a couple of weeks ago, they've been constantly revising it and making it better. The version that was out when I first started this was 2.12. Now they're on 2.15 or 2.16. And one of the things that they've updated was one of the things that I had problems with. And my Simpraxians will remember me talking about this with a customer somewhere, where I would start the scan and it would just never finish. The customer was really big and had a lot going on, and it would just never finish. And so they've fixed that. They've also added another command so you can do a workflow summary. And if you just do the workflow summary, it just gives you summary information, whereas it used to give you all the information about the workflows. Now they've got a workflow detail only that gives you the full thing. But if you've got a big environment, you can do that workflow scan, and it will just kind of get you the stuff at the top. And then if you need more data, you can do that. So it tightens up how long that scan takes, which is really nice. And then something I blogged about an hour ago was taking that report that scanner makes, because when I did that blog post, I figured, this spreadsheet comes out and everybody's going to be happy and it's all going to be what people need. But then I had some people reach out to me and say, hey, we've got a lot of workflows, thousands of workflows. How do we start figuring out where to focus our efforts? Because the clock's ticking. So that report comes out as a CSV file, so it pops right into Excel. And of course, Excel has all the filters and sorts and whatever, all the things that you need to do to massage that data. And there's another Excel file that already does that for you. It does a power pivot that lets you do all those kind of things. But myself being a PowerShell fan, I just blogged how to use PowerShell to do that, how to only find SharePoint 2010 workflows and only find, specific sites and all that. I did that for kind of two reasons. Number one is just because I like PowerShell and it was a fun exercise. But number two, last week I was on Joel Olson's thing, his blog or video channel or whatever it is. And we should throw a link in here. And he kind of threw the gauntlet down and he said, boy, wouldn't it be great if there was PowerShell that you could run today that would just disable all of those SharePoint 2010 workflows, and then you see who complains. Because like, Mark said earlier, a lot of these workflows are just when something gets updated, send a workflow. People would never even notice if those workflows went away. But wouldn't it be great to know now, in case we were wrong and somebody did notice that they went away and we had to fix it? And so he challenged me to do that. So the PowerShell work that I did in this blog post will hopefully dovetail into this other blog post that I'm going to write about how to disable workflows and delete them and all that now, so that you can kind of get ahead of the curve when it comes out in November. So those are the two things that I had to add today.
Awesome, Todd. Thank you. There's a cautionary note there, like if you've got workflows tied to an annual process, like your budget process, that process is only hot in October, November, December, no one will complain until October, November, December. And that's the only cautionary note I would think, right, on that.
Yeah, and I've kind of thought about this. I don't use workflows a lot. I don't use them a lot. I didn't make a lot of them, so I feel unqualified to talk about them. But there's been a lot of discussion about that. And so that report that gets generated has some information, like when the workflow was last changed.
Last run. Yeah, absolutely. Last run date. Yeah.
It doesn't show last run, though, but that information is in the workflow history list. So like I've thought about making a blog post that says, is your triaging this? Here are some of the things that you should look at, because the history list is you can say, show me, go to this list. Filter out all of the workflows and show me the last time every workflow in this list has ever been run.
Yeah. We talked about some of that on the 15th. In our last call.
Yeah. So then something that runs, at the end of the fiscal year in, June or July, that would bubble up as the last time this one is run. And then you can go chase those people down and say, hey, is this an A?
Awesome.
But I don't understand workflows well enough or how people use them to really write that.
Okay.
We have a question in the chat on if there's an easy replacement for the out-of-the-box approval and collect feedback workflows that an end user could set up.
John?
Yeah, given that John's joined us today, and John, you're the flow master. Do you want to speak to that?
Isn't there one in the approval? So in the modern list, if you go to the ultimate menu, there is two approvals that you could just click and set up. One is a content approval. Mm-hmm. The other one is a let me have a look. The other one's a gather signature, is it, or is it gather feedback?
I think with the approval actions, you have you gather feedback as those steps happen. I think the trick here is to think about what you're trying to accomplish as opposed to the way you used to do it, because it's not going to look exactly the same. In fact, it'll look better. It'll work better because it's a better user experience for the approvers, but it's not a sort of a one-to-one kind of thing. But I think you're right, John. The out-of-the-box approval actions give you probably the majority of what that workflow does.
Yeah, and to John's point, Shane did a video on the workflow, retirement, and all that kind of stuff, and he mentions a couple of those default ones that John was saying. So there's some that get built right in, and somebody in the chat room mentioned it too. There's some just automated flow, or some flows that just show up that kind of replace those ones. So somewhere in Shane's video, I forget where it is, he walks through those.
So you may not even need to crack. You may not even need to crack Power Automate. You may have out-of-the-box capability that replaces those. Know where to find it.
Yeah, if you've got multiple layers to approval, then you probably do have to crack Power Automate. But if you've got a simple, here's a thing, please approve it, I think that's all built into an action. All
right. If we're getting close to the top of the hour, so I'm gonna proceed a little bit with a couple questions we've gotten online that we wanted to share with everybody. The first one, I think I really want to talk to John, because I think John's company or organization has given some thought, if not to the automated migration, certainly to the automated management of Power Automate workflows. So John, would you say, are there tools? If people say, I've got 100 that I need to bring over, is there a way for me to do it systematically or automatically?
Not an automatic migration, not that I am aware of. I think there were several people I chatted with over these few years that have thought about this, but I don't know anyone that were able to build a complete tool. I do, so I used to do a lot of consulting, and now I try to make product. I try to go into a product business. I make two tools. One is called Flow Studio. The other one is called Clarity. So Studio and Clarity. Studio has an ability to migrate flows. So if you have a fairly complex flow in one site and you want to copy that to lots of different sites, then Studio creates a kind of a migration plan. And then for the one-to-many, you can just switch out the different URLs. It will do the copy. It will replace all the URLs or variables within those copies. So you can use that to manage your copy. That's a pretty, that's one of the, so Studio is a freemium tool. Most people on the free, they mainly use it to manage their own flows. If you have more than 50 flows, the flow UI becomes quite clunky to use. So Studio has a lot of features that help with just organizing your own flows. But on the premium side, that's when you need something like Migrate. Premium is $20 US a month. So if you want to just use it for 1 month and then turn that back off, it doesn't cost a lot. That's
John, if you'll provide a couple links, we'll include them in the follow-up materials that we send to folks on this call as well. So the second question we got from some folks in the automation community saying, why are you directing only people to Power Automate? Aren't there other excellent third-party tools out there for automating workflow, right? The Nintexes and the Webcons of the world, the K2s, like there are other tools out there. And so Mark, I think we had some kind of business-centric thinking about that. Do you want to take that? Or you want me to?
I think the first thought is if you don't have any of those tools yet, if you're not using a third-party tool, then, or actually if you are using a third-party tool, you may not care about this retirement because you already put your eggs in that basket. If you feel like you've got a lot of workflow requirements and you want to stack those requirements up against what these third-party tools do, that's great, but you've got until November 1st. If you're watching the calendar. So I think for the most part, I mean, what we would recommend to any of our clients at the moment is get into Power Automate. It's going to do, if you take the 80-20 rule, which is my favorite rule in the world, I think, most of those workflows are going to be very easily covered by what Power Automate does without any question at all. So that segmentation we talked about the last time, understanding, you know, sort of what your low, medium, and high complexity workflows are. Maybe your high level complexity, if you have a lot of those, it might be worth looking at some of these third-party tools. There are different schools of thought about whether Power Automate is a real workflow engine, and the semantics there sort of, yeah, John, see. So I think it's got to be requirements driven, but unfortunately, it's also got to be calendar driven. And even just trying to do the logistics to get a new tool set into a lot of organizations would take more than November 1st. So,
I think that was our main. That's how we came out, really, right? If you don't already have a third-party tool in place and you're at a large organization that has a long vendor qualification process, be real careful, because it's going to be tough to hit that timeline. That's not that they're not excellent tools, really well suited to do this and then some, but it's more of a calendar thing than anything. Speaking of calendar, we're at the top of the hour. We do have some next steps and takeaways. The one I'd want to highlight is John's list of resources about this process, this transition. It talks a little bit more about Power Studio that John mentioned on the call. So Todd's blog series now with fresh content, Microsoft's guidance, our own infographic for your kind of ongoing reference, and Todd's recent podcast with Joel, where they went into a little bit more detail on some of these topics as well. So any of these are all available to you for whenever. 2 weeks out, I kind of laid out the next 3 or so. We might tune these, but then 2 weeks out, we are on target for task management in Microsoft 365, what to use when, across To-Do, Planner, Outlook tasks, projects, Azure DevOps, like you name it. There's a million tools for task management. So how do we pick the right one for our particular use case? As always, if you've got additional questions, use the link at the bottom to submit those questions to us or ideas, or if you just want to drill into or have clarifying conversations or questions about anything we talked about, in much the same way that John did about the details of Power Automate and flows in this transition, please don't hesitate to contact us. So otherwise, Julie, is there anything else left in the queue that we need to tackle before we call it?
Nope, I've been watching, and I think we answered all the questions. So yeah, we're good.
Awesome. Thank you, everybody, for joining us. John, especially thank you for the guest appearance, our first
yes,
guest.
Thank you.
We appreciate it.
You, John.
John, please
go. That was awesome. Thank you.
Yes,
go to bed.
Go to sleep, John.
Please go to bed.
And let us know how tomorrow works out.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you, everybody, for joining us. Have a great week.
Bye.